Hey, what's going on guys? Arekkz here, and today I want to talk about Babylon's Fall. This is a game that, if you guys cast your mind back to E3 2018, Square Enix dropped a trailer for a game they were making in partnership with Platinum Games. Now, if you guys know me and you know some of the videos I've been speaking about recently, you'll know that anytime Platinum Games are mentioned, I am immediately there. So already, irrespective of what this game is, I'm going to buy it because you got to support Platinum Games. However, that aside, earlier this week, during the State of Play, there wasn't a great deal shown during that, but there were a couple of standout things, one of them being some new stuff for Ghost of Tsushima, or at least a tease for an upcoming trailer, the other one being the first gameplay look at Babylon's Fall, which is fantastic because factoring in that the last time we heard about this was E3 2018 and we've since been through another E3 with no word, I was beginning to wonder whether maybe this might have just been cancelled, which would have been rubbish because after Platinum Games having like scale-bound counsel for Xbox, it would have sucked if that also happened to Babylon's Fall. But alas, we are here, it's not been cancelled, it's still very much alive and kicking, and I want to take some time today to kind of just talk about the gameplay trailer, talk about what we've seen, give my impressions, because while yes, at this stage, very little is still known about the game, the official website doesn't really have many details, and short of this gameplay trailer leaving us to kind of, infer what we can, they haven't actually said anything official. So it is still pretty light, everything is pretty kind of mysterious around it, but there's some stuff you can see that looks fantastic, and I just want to talk about it, because I love these games, right? I love these action games, Bayonetta, Devil May Cry, Vanquish, anything like that, and Platinum Games are the GOATs when it comes to doing this stuff, right? They know action games like the back of their hand. They are arguably the best when it comes to doing it, so you know full well Babylon's Fall is going to be great, right? So, top level, for those of you guys that maybe haven't seen stuff, back in 2018, the trailer that dropped was more sort of just like a setting the scene trailer. It didn't really show, in fact, it didn't show any gameplay. It had a lot of these sort of like painted art scenes telling the history of the game, and then at the very end there was like a little tease of a character swiping this sword from this enemy and cutting through its chest. Fast forward to this week, when we got the gameplay trailer, then you can really see how it all comes together. Now, one of the things, or like the only thing they've kind of officially said about this is that from the PlayStation blog post, they said, in our new teaser trailer, unveiled during State of Play, you can take an early look at the game's fluid action gameplay for the first time, as well as its striking brushstroke visual art style delivered by the brushwork filter. And this is really cool, right? I've always been a fan of games that have kind of got those more unique visual styles. I personally love cell shading. I love that sort of like inky look that some games have, and I love this sort of like brushwork filter. I just feel like whenever you have that slightly less generic, slightly less kind of typical graphical style, when you're not just going for pure realism, you can often get away with a lot more, right? And especially when you have a studio that does over-the-top stuff like Platinum, then they can really lean into stuff like this. I feel like when you stray a little bit away from the norm, it just means that they can just, they've got no restraints, right? They can basically just be unchained, and they can just go wild. And for a game like this, for any of these kind of over-the-top action games, that's exactly what you want. But if we actually take a look at the trailer, there's a few really interesting things. Now, the top level thing is, of course, it's an action game, right? So you can see a lot of fluid motion, a lot of crazy fast combat, a lot of over-the-top combos, everything like that. All the kind of stuff you would expect if you've played action games, whether that be Bayonetta, DMC, Vanquish, Astral Chain, any of those kind of games. You're going to have your fast ground combos, you're going to have your launchers, you're going to have your aerial combos, you're going to have all of those different things, and that shows so incredibly well in this game. Like, Babylon's Fall looks, from the very small bit we've seen, looks fantastic. It's almost like, aesthetically, it's kind of got that Dark Souls setting, that gothic setting, what with all the architecture, the enemies you're fighting, but then it's also sort of combined with that DMC Rush style, and, when you look at the fact that he's got these like floating blades around him, that's kind of akin to something that Dante can do, or if you look to say something like Final Fantasy 15 with Noctis having those blades flying around, that is also pretty interesting. But I want to talk more about that, because that is obviously, from the trailer, you can see one of the core components for this. You see it in the artwork. He has these sort of blades that float around him that seem to be tethered to him by some kind of, again, we don't exactly know what it is, some kind of spiritual tether, some sort of like ethereal, honestly I don't know, right? But what's interesting is how that plays into the gameplay. You can see during certain segments in the gameplay that he can use it to grapple and tether to enemies, which is really useful. But what I think is probably the most interesting is when it comes to fighting the bosses. If you fast forward to the end of the trailer, and there's also actually a snippet of this from the very first trailer they showed, there's a segment, whilst fighting these bosses, where at the very end, he knocks the sword out of the boss's hand, grabs it with his ethereal tethers, and it suddenly then becomes his weapon, and he uses it to finish the boss, which makes me think there's going to be sort of like a weapon obtaining mechanic, much like, say, playing through a dungeon in Zelda and getting that unique item. It might well be that there's like X number of bosses and every single boss has like a unique weapon, and when you defeat them, maybe you defeat them with their weapon and then suddenly that becomes your weapon. I mean, obviously we haven't seen enough gameplay to know whether at the end of finishing that boss, that giant sword becomes yours, or whether it's literally just a cinematic way to end that fight. It could well just be one of those things. It could be like a little sort of cutscene thing where it's a fancy way to finish any of the boss fights. You just kill it with its own weapon, as sort of like an insult to injury thing. But I would love it if it actually became like a mechanic whereby every time you fight a new boss, you suddenly get a new weapon, which completely changes the way you play. Because then you can suddenly start thinking, all right, this guy they fight in the trailer has a giant greatsword. Maybe the next guy has a giant hammer. Maybe the guy after that has a scythe. Maybe the guy after that has a bow. There could be loads of crazy things like that. And then by the time you get to the end of the game, you've got like 10, 15 different weapons that you can use to pull off some absolutely insane combos. And we know that Platinum like that kind of stuff, right? They're not afraid to do that stuff when it comes to action games, giving you so many different options that are just like far too many for your mind to compute. So that could honestly work very well. And if you actually look at the very first trailer, you can see, as mentioned, that also happens there. He's fighting this knight with a shield, and then although it's not really clear gameplay, you can see at the very end, he does actually grab the sword and slices through the middle. So again, from the two videos we've seen, that does seem to be a recurring concept. So the ability to kind of take those weapons, and again, factoring that in with the whole brushstroke artwork, the fact that you've got this, you know, slightly less realistic but more like outlandish visual style to it, means they can really put some flair into it. Especially when you get into that combat and you have these like over-the-top effects, you can then really like amp that up with this new filter. So yeah, I can't wait to see this. Now, they did of course say that at the end of the trailer, it said tune in summer 2020 to find out more. So if I had to hazard a guess, I would of course assume that they are going to be showing this at E3 next year. And keep in mind, next year is of course also the new console generation. So we're going to be getting PS5, we're going to be getting Xbox Scarlet. So with that being said, I would assume that this is probably geared towards the next gen, which would probably explain why maybe they didn't necessarily show too much following the 2018 announce. Maybe they're now in a position to do this because, you know, this could well be running on next gen hardware. So whether it's one of those games that spans current gen and next gen, we don't know yet. But I honestly do think we'll get to a point where this will probably be maybe even like a launch title for PS5, which would be fantastic. Unless, of course, they said you'll just find out more in 2020, in which case maybe it's a little bit further off. Either way, I am very excited for this. Again, anything by Platinum Games, I'm there, and this just looks cool, right? It combines an aesthetic style that is really quite awesome and perfectly fitted to a game like this and a studio like this. It contains a over-the-top action-style combat system, which I absolutely love, with the potential to expand that even further if, of course, this obtaining weapon system ends up being true. And, of course, you know, having a look at that initial trailer that dropped back in 2018 means that maybe they're also going to try and weave potentially cool narrative into it. It's got this whole sort of historical angle to it, so I mean maybe that could have just been like a concept art thing trying to paint the picture and give people an idea before they were ready to show gameplay, but maybe it would also be nice if they can kind of weave a really cool, like, especially given the setting, when you look at the sort of gothic architecture, you look at all the like the knights and whatnot, that has the potential to have a really interesting epic story weaved into it. So hopefully it ends up being like, you know, because sometimes the action games you end up focusing a lot more so on just the action, and you, while there is a story, you end up just kind of blitzing through and just hacking things to death. So hopefully they can kind of strike a good balance and then have like a nice story or a good story, cool combat, and yeah, I'm definitely there. But anyway, that's enough rambling for me for the time being. I'm gonna let you guys watch the trailer because obviously we've been talking over the whole thing the entire time. So check this out, because hearing it all in motion, anytime you see all that and you like hear all the hits and you see all the combos, it's just, yo, it's 10 out of 10. I'm very excited for this, so definitely stay tuned. As when we find out more, I'll be sure to keep you guys bang up to date. hope you guys enjoyed that video. Remember to hit that subscribe button and also click on the little bell icon to turn on notifications so you don't miss my next upload. Also, don't forget you can check out 269 and Paradise Central streaming over on Twitch 6 days a week. You can find a link to the multi-stream in the description box down below. Be sure to drop by and get involved. Thanks again for watching. Take it easy. Catch you next time. Peace out.